Good morning. I am recording today in the morning, which I usually do not do, but nevertheless, I can wish you a beautiful, wonderful day ahead. We had 2 days Rosh Chodesh, and we are now into the month of Adar Sheni. You know, this Shabbos is Parshas Pekudei, which is the final Sedra of Sefer Shamos. At the conclusion, we stand up in unison, the whole Tzibur, and we call out Chazak, Chazak, V'nis Chazek. And by Mincha, we usher in Sefer Vayikra. Now, we know that this is the conclusion of the 5 parshios that dealt with the building of the Mishkan, the construction, the gathering of all the materials for the Mishkan, and this is the conclusion of it. Last week's Seder Vayakel was a plural. In other words, Moshe Rabbeinu gathered Klal Yisrael to tell them a message from Hashem. And I told you last week that it didn't say Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe Lemor like it does by most Sedras, because Vayakel was a reference to the Vayakilu. It was a kapara of the Chet HaEgel for the Mishkan. But the word Ele Pekudei is a singular. In other words, singular meaning it's speaking to each and every Yid about Pekudei, about an accounting. And the point being that the Mishkan was a temporary place to be. Once the Bais Hamikdash was erected, they didn't use anymore. There was no more Mishkan. So for the 479 years that the Mishkan serviced them, it came to a conclusion with the building of Bayis Rishon by Shlomo HaMelech. And the first Bayis stood for 410 years, and the second Bayis stood with a 70-year intermission of Golus Bavel. The second stood for 420 years. Now, the fact that there was a message of Pekudei that every Yid in their lifetime have to, at the conclusion of the years given them, have to make a cheshbon, even though we make a cheshbon, as the Gemara says, every Erev Shabbos is a time of tshuva, every Erev Rosh Chodesh, which is Yom Kippur Koton, and then we have Yom Kippur, and we have each month, each week, and even every day, a person before he goes to sleep is supposed to stop for a few moments and think, what did he do that day? Did he miss a Zman Krishma, or did he make all the Zmanei Krishma? Did he daven with 3 minyanim? Did he miss the day in giving tzedakah to some aniyim? So the point being that the message is conclusions bring with it an awakening, to look back and to see how it was done and what was done. And it's a sobering message, because sometimes it's delightful and sometimes it's not so delightful when we have to think back, I missed this, I missed that. A person could almost get depressed, but he has to ride through the days and the weeks with some sort of awakening and cheshbonos that he shouldn't be wasting time or wasting life. Now, we know that in the first pasuk of Pekudei, there is a double lashon. Eila Pekudei ha-mishkan, Mishkan ha-eidos. So the word Mishkan is repeated twice. And as Rashi and as the Chazal talk about, the Medrash talks about it, the fact that it was twice is a remez to the two Batei Migdosh that were of service to Klal Yisrael. But there was destruction. So that means we had it for a temporary time, and then we're left in the middle of Golus. So the Medrash quickly says that the reason that it says Mishkan twice, besides a remez to the two Batei Migdosh, that it was a remez to the fact that they were a mashkon. Now, what is a mashkon? If a person needs the money and he doesn't want to sell the object, he can go to a pawn store and he can make up with the people that for 60 days, 90 days, 120, or forever, they will not sell it. And that he will reserve the right to come and pay them their fee, plus give them back their money that they gave him. So a mashkon is something which is an object which is put into abeyance until the person could get it back, or at a certain agreed time, they could sell it if the person doesn't come back. And Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, Zichrona Levracha, used to, on this chazal, often say that why did it have to serve as a mashkon? That means they were here, and they used the Batei Migdash. There was avoida, there were karbonos, there were so many things. And then they were destroyed. And when Keshiyibana Bais HaMikdash, when the third one will be ready, and there'll be the Geula Shlema, it will reveal itself, it'll come and express a new beginning. What do we need? The concept of mashkon. And the idea, said the Rosh Yeshiva, is that Klal Yisrael always needed reference to be able to hang on. Don't forget, our days of Golus were very, very dark. And a person could come to a point, throw up his hands and say, look, who could handle this? And we're forced to go through life under that umbrella. But if a person knows that something is waiting outside, no matter what he has as trials or tribulations within the house, but when he goes out, there's a car waiting and he can move on to wherever he has to go, the fact that there's something hanging on, waiting outside, sets his frame of mind at a different level. And that's what the Rosh Yeshiva wanted to bring out from Mishkan and Mishkan Ha'edos, that it's referring to a mashkon, because you may love an item. It may have been an heirloom, and you never wanted to sell it, but you were desperate for the money. So you went and you put it into a state of oblivion, like you put it in, but it wasn't gone. And every time you think of it, your comforting thought is that when I get the money gathered, I'll be able to go back and get it. You don't have to sever your hergish, your feeling, with the actual item that is still in existence, and you still have a kesher to. And that's the reason why the Medrash compares it to a mashkon, because Klal Yisrael were able to hang in there with all the tsaros and challenges, knowing that the Geula Shlema will come, and it's waiting to come, and we're going to have just a hemshech of the third Bais Hamikdash, because we're reminded of the first two. Now, the fact is that when the Mishkan finished, the Medrash says that Moshe Rabbeinu, you came down from the mountain the day after Yom Kippur, Vayehi Mimacharos, and you came down and you told us that we have to quickly put together the provisions, the items for the Mishkan to be built. We finished it the first day of Hanukkah, which was like 3 months later, and you were able at that point to begin the dedication, the celebration, the inauguration of the Mishkan, and you told us to wait from then until Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So the Medrash says that the cynics, the naysayers, ganged up on Moshe, not physically, but they started to yell at him and said, you rushed us and you told us to immediately do this and do that, and now it's ready and you're going to wait to Nisan because you want to begin the activities of the Mishkan in the month that Yitzchak Avinu was born, in Nisan. And they were really poking fun at him and being very sarcastic and very negative that he wanted to wait. But the reason that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Medrash says, wanted them to wait is because what brought about having a Mishkan, one of the main reasons, was the chet, the avodah zara of the ego. And the Ramban says it wasn't mamash avodah zara, it was really just they were looking for an intermediary. But on the day of the 40th day, when Moshe Rabbeinu was supposed to come down, you didn't have the patience to wait. He ended up coming down on the 40th day. It wasn't just the beginning of the 40th day, it was the end of the 40th day. But it was the 40th day. And had you waited, you wouldn't have brought this calamity to Klal Yisrael that we're still in Golas for 3,300 years since the ego, had you just had the simple patience. So you need a lesson in patience. And that, says the Med, is the reason that they were told to wait from the first day of Hanukkah, when they could have begun the actual avodah of the Mishkan, and they ended up waiting until Chodesh Nisan. So you need to learn how to have some patience, because you brought a terrible tragedy to Klal Yisrael by not having patience. So now you finished, you're ready to go, and you're going to just wait until the time that I tell you, because you have to incorporate into your lives that rushing to conclusions and rushing to action can sometimes be very harmful and a big detriment in your plan for what you want at that point. Now, the end of the parsha, we're going to come back to the beginning shortly, but at the end of the parsha it says that Klal Yisrael, when they actually finished a Mishkan and wanted to put it up, they could not do it. It was too heavy. So they carried it to Moshe Rabbeinu, And Moshe Rabbeinu tried, and he couldn't do it. So Moshe Rabbeinu said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what are we going to do? It's too heavy for us to put it up. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him, you pretend you're putting it up. Go over and act as if you're beginning to put it up, and I will be there to do the work. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu actually put up the Mishkan. Now, if Hashem was going to put up the Mishkan, why, when they finished the Mishkan, didn't HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself just put it up? He knew that the Klal Yisrael would try, and Moshe Rabbeinu would try, and at the end he'd have to do it for them anyway. So why wasn't the task of putting it up just done? But the answer the Meforshim say is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to teach them that there's such a thing in this world, in Olam Hazeh, of Uveirachticha b'chol asher ta'aseh, that the bracha comes into something that a person does after he tries and works at it and does it. He cannot just sit back and ask for the miracle. He cannot just pretend that he will wait until someone else does. A person who wants bracha has to have an olam hazeh. This is the world of ta'aseh, of doing, of maisa, and that when the person does, he sees the bracha. It begins to come in. So, to instill in Klal Yisrael the concept that this is a working world and that to get things done and be successful, we have to work. Now, the question is asked, we know that throughout the Midbar for 39 years when the Mishkan was there, it wasn't there the first year. It was Hukam HaMishkan 1 year after they left Mitzrayim. And they went and had 42 masos. They went and traveled around. In other words, as the Chazal say, they could have gone from Mitzrayim in 11 days to Eretz Yisrael. 11 days. But they ended up in the Midbar and going up and down and back and forth for 40 years. And then they went into Eretz Yisrael because of the story of the Meraglim, which we will discuss at the appropriate time. But they were there for 40 years, and there were 42 masos. In other words, some places they stayed a very short time, a few weeks. There were some places that they stayed 10% of the 40 years. They didn't move. So the 42 masos took place. They took down the Mishkan, and they put it back up, and they stayed for the designated time that they were supposed to be there. So the Meforshim asked that when it came to put up the Mishkan, they couldn't do it. And they brought it to Moshe Rabbeinu, and he couldn't do it. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to. But now they went and started traveling. They were picking it up and putting it down, putting it up, and traveling with that. No problem. They didn't need anyone's help. That means they themselves worked at it and they did it, and there was no problem. So why the first time that they had to put it up, they couldn't do it under any circumstance, yet for the 39 years in the Midbar, they were putting it up, putting it down, putting it up, and putting it down, no problem. So Chazal answer and say that there was an unbelievable force that the Mishkan should not happen. It was the Yetzer Hara, call it the Samach Mem, call it the bad influence, whatever you want to characterize this negative, evil force that's in the world. We have it in our own selves. We come to say Krishma 15 minutes before the end of the Zman Krishma, and the Yetzer Hara is there because saying Krishma in the morning is like eating matzah at the Seder. It's a mitzvah d'oraisa. So when a person wakes up late and you ask him, did you end up last night eating matzah? He would look at you like you're crazy. What do you mean? You think I'm a Yid and I wouldn't have eaten matzah at the Seder, the night of Pesach? Yet, if he wakes up and he has 15 minutes to the Zman Krishma, saying Krishma is the same mitzvah d'oraisa as eating matzah. And he sits down to say Krishma, and his eye catches a newspaper or a magazine or his telephone or something, and he gets engrossed and he wakes up, and 20 minutes later he starts to say Shema, he missed the Zman Krishma. The Yetzer Hara won the struggle, and we have this every single day. But the Mishkan was much more than that, because Mishkan meant the Hashras HaShechina of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And of course, the whole world is filled with Hashem and with His Shechina. So what did we need the Mishkan? But the answer is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu condensed the intensity of His Shechina to a level that never existed in this world when He made the Mishkan and He went in. V'asuli migdash v'shachanti b'socham, that he was able to live and be inside the confines of the Mishkan, HaKadosh Baruch Hu and His Shechina, in the most strengthful dose possible in Olam Hazeh. So that was a tremendous gain. Also, the fact is that it says, V'asuli migdash v'shachanti b'socham, and I will dwell in them. It doesn't say, like Rashi points out, b'socho lo nemar. It doesn't say I'm going to dwell in it, but it says I'm going to dwell in them, meaning in the hearts of each and every Yiddish kind, that they would have the feeling of being closer when they went in and they brought a korban, and when they did any avoida inside of the Mishkan, that they were super close to our Kodesh Baruch Hu. And they would feel this. And with it came the attachment in the strongest way to our Kodesh Baruch Hu. The Yetzer Hara wasn't going to just let this happen without a big fight. And he knew that the ego, which they would end up doing, and that the kapara would come from this Mishkan, that he would do everything to succeed with the ego, so that the Mishkan's effectiveness, if there'd be no Mishkan, we would have been who knows how long in Golus, and how long and how intensified the painfulness of the Golus is. So what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did with giving us the Mishkan and succeeding in having it for the service and the avodah of Klal Yisrael, would mark the difference of they had tripped and there was the ego, but at least the greatest antidote and medicine for that terrible Aveira would be made available. And that's why the Yetzer Hara, when he succeeded with the ego, but he saw the Mishkan coming, He did everything and anything to stop them from putting it up. And because once it was put up, then the Klal Yisrael won the battle with this Samach Mem, with the Yetzer Hara. And it remained, and after that they were able to pick it up and put it down and pick it up and put it down. But it was the first erection of the Mishkan that became the item of contention that it put out all of its koiches that it not be, because it was going to become the medium and the vehicle for Klal Yisrael to deal and to be close to and to be able to communicate, and everything in that package of what the Mishkan did. He tried to stop it, but it happened because they put up a fight. When they couldn't do it, they didn't give up. They went and gave it to Moshe. And when Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't do it, he gave it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's how it ended up. It ended up happening the way it happened. Now, when Moshe Rabbeinu put it up, it says, Vayevarech osam Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu gave them a bracha. And Rashi says, what was this bracha that he gave? Yehi ratzon shetishre shechina b'maseh yedechem. Now, when we teach the children that Rashi, we say that it means that Klal Yisrael finished the Mishkan. Moshe Rabbeinu put it up with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of course, doing the work, and he just going through the motion. And then Moshe Rabbeinu gave them a bracha that what you're going to be working at, your avodah, your karbanos, with all the halachas, that there should be a bracha in it, and you should be successful in everything you want to do in the Mishkan. But others, as a matter of fact, there was a Rebbe in Torah, Rav Sheps, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha, who asked the question, why didn't Moshe Rabbeinu give them a bracha at the very beginning, before they began? Now he was giving them the bracha at the end of the story, that they should be able to have success and shetishra shechina b'maseh yedechem, and that there be the ability to succeed. But he could have given that same bracha at the very beginning. You're starting to build it. You should be successful in building it. And after it's built, then everything that has to be done in it should be also with great success. But he didn't say anything at the beginning. Because the only time, as I said before, a bracha can come to fruition is after you have worked and toiled and sweat and put forth all of the effort. Then the bracha can come flying in. And Moshe Rabbeinu realized this. And he gave them a bracha of V'hi noyam Hashem Elokeinu Oleinu Maseh Yodenu Konana Oleinu Maseh Yodenu Konanehu. And I mentioned to you around 4 months or 6 months ago that the reason that this is a power keg, this pasuk, it's a pasuk in Tehillim, but it's a pasuk that Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to say to them because it had all the components of the powerful antidotes and the ability to break through barriers. You see, when a Yid wants to do a mitzvah, the whole job of the Yetzer Hara is to stop him from doing the mitzvah. So it exercises different vehicles of how to get the person, make him lazy, make him tired, convince him if it costs him any money that you don't have the money and why you're spending so much money, and everything to do with all of these things that deal with the success in concluding this mitzvah. But the pasuk, and that's why we say it so often before we light Hanukkah candles, before we eat matzah, before we eat maror, we always say right before we make the bracha, V'hi noyam Hashem Elokeinu, Oleinu Maseh Yodeinu Konana, Oleinu Maseh Yodeinu Konaneu. That we say again that bracha, that pasuk, to diffuse the time bomb or the grenade that the Yetzer Hara is sending to stop us. Why is it that pasuk? So says the Arizal, because there are 5 times at the end of that pasuk anu. V'hi noyam Hashem Elokeinu, Oleinu, Maseh Yodeinu, Konana Oleinu, it's 4, Umaseh Yodeinu, Konanehu. It's 5 times words that end up with a nun vav at the end. Now nun vav, nun is begematria 50, and vav is begematria 6. So the nu is begematria 56. Now, if you have 5 nus in that pasuk at the end of 5 words, 5 times nun vav is 280. And we are told that there are different categories of bad forces, kitos, groups of troublemaking kolchos to stop Yidden from doing mitzvahs. But if you say that pasuk, of V'hi noyam, it's mevatel the 280, because there's 280 in the gematria of nu. 5 times 56 is 280, and it's mevatel that koyach of the kitos to prevent goodness in this world through Torah and mitzvahs. So when we say V'hi noyam, it's mevatel that. Moshe Rabbeinu knew that through the Mishkan there was going to be so much kapara, so much success for Klal Yisrael in their wars, in their work, and everything that went on. And it was a tremendous, tremendous, powerful antidote. So he chose that one pasuk before Klal Yisrael was going to step in minutes later and begin the avodah, that he wanted to diffuse the power of that negative force. And that's why he said specifically the pasuk of V'hi noyam. So the Ma'aseh HaMishkan, as it came to Klal Yisrael, as I said, that there were going to be obstacles because this was going to be an achievement which would elevate the possibilities of Klal Yisrael in their connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and in their successes in their avodah. And at the very beginning of the Sedra, the Medrash says that Moshe Rabbeinu heard people saying, look at all the millions that went through the Mishkan, came into the Mishkan, and lived with Klal Yisrael in producing the Mishkan. All the gold, all the silver. So it says that Moshe Rabbeinu started with the silver, and he made a tremendous cheshbon of exactly to the penny, to the last coin, of how much silver. And Klal Yisrael saw that it was so erlich that he didn't even need to go on to the gold to prove to them that there was honesty, and that he never, ever touched anything beyond what was needed, and nothing went in. As a matter of fact, the Medrash even says, almost like in an ugly way, Klal Yisrael said, his neck is getting bigger, and his stomach is getting bigger. How is he gaining the weight? Where is he getting all of that food? As if to say he was using the money that they were collecting for the Mishkan to make himself heavier. He was overeating. The Medrash says this. But after he finished counting all the silver, and they saw how he was doing it coin by coin and item by item, he saw that their whole attitude changed. It's unbelievable that they would even think such a thing. But we learn from it that, and there are many stories of how tzaddikim went out of their way to reinforce and underscore the honesty of an action or the honesty of something that happened. That v'yisem nekiyim me'Hashem u'miyisrael, and they went to a level of unbelievable distance to show that their hands were clean or that their machshava was pure, and for Klal Yisrael. In other words, when Klal Yisrael left Mitzrayim, Hashem said, I'm going to take you out exactly at Chatzos. And we spoke about this in Parshas B'Shalach 8 weeks ago or 10 weeks ago, so whenever the Parsha was. And Moshe Rabbeinu said, Kachatzos, not Bachatzos, at midnight. He went, not like Hashem told him, but he said Kachatzos, around midnight. Why? Because says the Medrash that the Moshe Rabbeinu said these cynics and these wise guys, if their watch is 10 seconds off, they're going to bring into question the veracity and the validity of everything that Moshe Rabbeinu said. Because he say, well, you see that there is a clock, a watch that is off 10 seconds. So they're going to say, well, he said at midnight, and it's not midnight, it's 15 seconds off. So these cynics and these sarcastic comments caused him to change what he heard from HaKadosh Baruch Hu and say to them kachatzos, because the oilam that he was dealing with, he didn't want to leave them an inch of space to question the veracity and the validity of what he was giving over to them as to when they were going to leave. So we see to the level, the distance a person has to go, that if someone sees something, and we have many things marasayan, we're not allowed to do certain things, because if a person sees the person doing it, they may misunderstand and it may misrepresent. So since it misrepresented or could misrepresent, they did it the other way. So when the money was in question and Moshe Rabbeinu heard such a comment, he started to go to the nth degree to show, and it shows all of us how careful we have to be. You know that there are many, I remember school principals used to say, especially all of us that were in girls' schools, that we never in all of our years were in the office alone with a secretary, or we didn't call them by their first names. The familiarity led to possible question of impropriety or anything, because people have wandering minds. And when you leave open the door even 1 inch for question, then you could end up with a flood of question. So we have to condition our minds like Moshe Rabbeinu went out v'es that he went out to the last penny. Once he heard such comments of question, oh, look at all the money that was around and look how heavy he's getting. As ridiculous almost as it sounds. But people have been destroyed by falsehood, but they were left open because they weren't careful in how they said, where they said, and what they said. So a person has to really shake himself into a position of being careful. We can't go crazy, but being careful with our actions and our words, not to leave room for suspicion. Now we know, for instance, and the Sephorna talks about it, that there was a kikar of zahav, the amount of gold that there was 29 kikar. And that was a tremendous amount. And the Sephorna says that was for the Mishkan that we're talking about. But when it came to the Bais Hamikdash, there was so much more gold in the first Bais Hamikdash, and there was an unbelievable bigger amount in the second Bais Hamikdash. Yet, says the Sephorna, that the comparison of the Hashra Shechina, in any of them, nothing came to the Mishkan. That means the Bais Hamikdash, which was much more glamorous and big and beautiful. The Mishkan was a little tiny tabernacle that traveled with them, that they were able to bring their Torahs and they were able to bring their korbanos and whatever. So the point that the Sephorna wants to bring out is that many people think that the grandeur and the brilliance of a, let's say, edifice, a building, depends on how much marble and how much magnificence, and that's what will make the difference. The Mishkan set the pace, says the Sephorna. It was the smallest, insignificant, yet it had the most Hashros Hashchina, more than Bayis Rishon, with all of its brilliance and all of its luster. And the second had even more. Yet it had even less than the first Bais Hamikdash. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't look at a person in his lifetime at how much money he had. He looks at what did he do with the money. So a person may be making $1,500 a week, and Hashem looks at what he spends his money on, how much tzedakah he gave, and how he lives. And it does make a difference what you do with your money. You come to Sukkot, you have to buy a lulav and esrog. Some of them look like even a suffix if they're good. But the other ones cost $75 more, or $180 more, or $500. So what do you do with your money? And the person making $15,000 a week is looked at, how did he handle his money? So we are looked at how we handled it. But the ones that had more magnificence or fancier houses with it didn't make a difference. Did you have orchim at your table on Shabbos? How did you treat the orchim that were sitting in your house? How did you deal with the money that you spent on food? Was there proper and abundant allocation for Shabbos? Or was every night a steak dinner the goal of what money you were spending on your food? So that, says the Sephorna, made the difference in the first to the second Bais Hamikdash. And sometimes it's the Hizoaru b'vnei aniyim shemehem teitzei Torah. The Gemara says that the patriarch of the Soloveitchik family. Now we know there was the Briska Rov. His father was Reb Chaim Briska, and his father was the Beis Halevi, Reb Yosef Dov Halevi, and his father was Moshe. Now Reb Moshe Soloveitchik was not a big Talmud Chacham, but he was a very rich man, and he suddenly lost his money. And it was so perplexing because he did such tzedakah with his money that Reb Chaim Volozhiner called a bezdin to sit and be done, to discuss what in halacha or what in practicality in terms of his daily life did he do that he became poor. Reb Chaim Volozhiner. And at the end of their diyun, of their discussion and their adjudication, they came out that he was living, Baruch Hashem, almost like a perfect life for a Yid, except he was giving too much tzedakah. And they were toila on it. So Reb Moshe said, I was able to this and that and visit more lumber yards but now I don't have the money, so I may as well go into the Beis Medrash and learn. And out of dachkos, he didn't have the money, but he was learning. And he began with his children, and it uplifted the level of their lumdus and their learning tremendously. And you see, he was the progenitor of such a dynasty of Soloveitchiks. Reb Chaim, the Briska Rov. I mean, just look at the lineage, what came out of him. So Reb Chaim Volozhiner said that you see the answer that we came to was correct. Because now that he became an Oni, he became very, very poor, he came out with such children and grandchildren that we understand that when it says he zoharu b'vnei aniyim, that he had to become an Oni to produce such a level Now, there were many that had Torah and Gedula in one. Rabbeinu HaKadosh, who was Masada the Mishnah, and wrote down the Mishnah of what we have in Mishnayos because people were beginning to forget. He had an unbelievable level of riches and Torah, and he was as big as could be. So it doesn't mean only the poor, but there is a disproportionate amount of poor that become the greatest of the great in levels of learning. Now, I must say, however, that there were tzaddikim who disagreed. I mean, the Gemara says this, but they still wished ashiras and brachas for big parnasa, because many times in many of the generations, if we look back through the Jewish history of different communities, 200 years ago, 400 years ago, 800 years ago, that the hardship of survival and a piece of bread was so difficult that tzaddikim wanted, and that was the discussion between Reb Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev, who wanted Napoleon to win, and the Balatanya, who wanted him to lose. And Reb Mendel Rimanev, who wanted him to win. Because everyone agreed that if Napoleon would have won, that there would have been an abundance of parnasa, and the deathly test that they were living through to find a potato, to find something to feed their children, was so unbelievably hard that they wanted the matzav to get better, and that Yidden should have money and Yidden should be able to have the harchavas hadas. And by the way, the end in Shemayim, as the tzaddikim brought down the story, was that whoever, because there were so many tzaddikim for Napoleon, so many against, that in Shemayim they didn't know what to do, so they decided that whoever blows shofar that year first will end up the one who will decide if Napoleon should win or lose. So that Rosh Hashanah, Reb Levi Yitzchak Barditchev got up, and his tzibur didn't know what was going on, and he told him to quickly run through Shachris so that they could get quickly to Kriyas HaTorah and then Tekiyah Shofar. And when he went on the bima and took the shofar, he said, "Oy, my mechutin, who was the Balatanya, beat me," because that year the Balatanya, and no one knew, not in Reb Levi Yitzchak Barditchev's tzibur, what was happening, and no one knew by the Balatanya, but the Balatanya, Rosh Hashanah in the morning, got up and said, "This year we are blowing shofar before Shachris." So he was the one that beat everyone, and Napoleon ended up losing. And that's the pshat, that tzaddikim really run the world. Tzaddikim goizrim v'HaKadosh Baruch Hu mekayim. Tzaddikim say this is what will be or won't be, and that's what exactly happens. And I also want to say to you, even though Reb Chaim Volozhner was of this, and he was the biggest of the big, and the Svarim, he wrote the Mussar Svarim, and his yeshiva was the first fashionable Litvish yeshiva. But there were differences of opinion, and I'll give you one example. One example is that there is such a thing called a Hoicha Shemona Esrei. It means you'll find by some of the Litvisha that they won't say the silent Shemona Esrei. After Ashrei and Kaddish, the Chazan immediately begins Shemona Esrei out loud through Kedusha, and everyone answers to the Kedusha. And then the Chazan just continues silently after Kedusha, and everyone begins Shemona Esrei. And it was said that Reb Chaim Volozhiner did this to save the time for learning of the boys in the yeshiva, the difference of the extra 5 minutes to first say the quiet Shemona Esrei and then say out loud the Chazoras Hashatz. Now the Arizal, of course, who lived 200 years before Reb Chaim Volozhiner, was fire against this because he explained, and no one did it in his time, and today you'll never find a Hasidisha ever doing such a thing in Sibur. But the Litvish should do it. And Rabbi Aaron Kotler, Zechet Tzaddik L'Vrocha, who was the Godel Ador, to many who didn't have Hasidish Rebbeim and whatever, he did it in his yeshiva. So I, Chas v'Sholom, who am I and what am I to even suggest criticism? But I'm not criticizing. I'm only pointing out differences of opinion. Because the Arizal explained that when a person davens Shemona Esrei quietly, he's asking for things. He's asking for Goel Yisrael, there should be Geula, Rifa'enu, the sick people that are in desperate need of a Refuah Shalema should get the Refuah Shalema. And he said that the request is in the quiet Shemona Esrei. But the answer to the request is in the loud Shemona Esrei, when the people answer Amen to the bracha. So if a person's davening and crying by Rifa'enu that someone should get better, but he doesn't say Amen to the loud Rifa'enu, he asked and then walked away before a response. So therefore, a Hasidisha who know Kisvei Ari and Kabbalah, more into Kabbalah than, let's say, the Litvisha in their Derech HaLimud, would never say a quick Shemona Esrei with the Kedusha. You're leaving out all the Bakoshas, the response with the answering of Amen. As the Arizal said, who is as big and bigger than any of them. So I only pointed out as a point of reference how important it is to say the quiet Shemona Esrei and then answer to the loud Shemona Esrei. And I hope, Be'ezus Hashem, that all of our tefillas should be niskabel l'rachamim u l'rotzon.